Starting now. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining in these sessions about how to get the most from Azure SQL Database and managed instance. You know, this session is part of the sessions that we have during these next days in our Global Azure 22 this year. So we have many sessions, and we are going to talk about how to obtain the most from Azure SQL Database and managed instance. So my name is José Manuel Jurado. And with me is my colleague Sabrin. But before to introduce us in these sessions, I would like to change the role. Let's try to change the role. Okay, right now we are going to, let's say, to simulate a role play. The typical question, the typical conversations that we have in our company, it's about how to get the most and pay less, for example, to obtain more performance, to reduce the issues that we have. So imagine that right now we are in this role play. I am the CIO of Contoso company, where my main concern is to pay less, so achieve more. So because my main role in this company, Contoso, is to obtain more benefit. Okay, you have my telecompetence here, and with me is my colleague Sabrin. Sabrin, if you want to introduce yourself in this company.
Yes, of course. My name is Sabrin Alsahsah, and I will be in this role play. I will be the DBA and the consultant that will be helping the CIO to deliver the options that he can use in his Azure SQL database in order to achieve this goal.
Okay. So the most important thing is we are going to play in this role play. Okay, so I'm going to ask questions. We are going to interact together in order to go the different things that we have in Azure SQL Database. So let's go from the first slide, Sabrin. Okay.
Yes.
So Sabrin, thanks for joining in this session. But Sabrin, I think that we need to reduce the cost. Okay, because we are paying a lot too much money to Microsoft. But I would like to still keeping the same performance. And I would like to know, as you are a DBA in this company, I would like to know what are the suggestions that you have in order to reduce this cost.
Yes, and for this goal, since you are aiming to benefit more from the Azure SQL database, but at the same time keeping and maintaining the same performance, but you would like to reduce the cost, we have multiple options, such as you can see here, you have the read scale out, the scalability feature that is represented by the Azure SQL, as well as the serverless. And let me walk you through these options in details more. So let me start by the first option that you can use for the read scale out, which is currently available in multiple service tiers, such as the premium and the business critical and the hyperscale. And what do we mean by this feature is basically that since you have multiple replicas, as you can see on the graph that we see on the right, for every and each database that you have in Azure SQL, you have replicas for that database. And you can see that how is the connection between these. And by enabling this feature and using it, you can offload the workload from the primary and make one of your replicas dedicated for the read queries. So instead of overwhelming your primary replica with all the transactions that you are committing to your database, you can keep the normal workload on the primary while offloading the read queries to the read replica. This will be offloading the workload that you have. And at the same time, since you have the replicas, it will be the same compute size. So let us assume that you have the primary as business critical, for example, vCore 16. It will have the same compute size on the replica, and you will be able to benefit from this compute size without any extra cost. So I would recommend you to use this option if you are using one of these service tiers. And please note that this feature is enabled by default on the premium and the business critical service tier, while on the hyperscale, it will require from you to go and enable it. You can enable, for example, from Azure Portal, PowerShell, or REST API. The same process or the same tools you can use if you would like to disable this feature at any time. I would like to share with you a quick example here, as we can see from the graph that we have. Let us assume that we have two applications. One of the applications are sending OLTP transactions, and the other one is analytics application that is only reading information and data from the database that you have. You can pass the parameter application intent within your connection string in order to direct these queries to the read replica. And one of the ways that you can check which replica you are connecting to, you can use simply this select query, and I will show you later also how you can connect to it. And if you get the value read only, this means that you are connecting to the read replica one. And also I wanted to show you as well a sample of the connection string and how you can pass this information to offload the workload for the read replicas.
So if I understood well, you mentioned that if I use premium or business critical or hybrid scale, I have another server that I could run queries without any cost for me.
Yes, exactly. And it would be the same compute size.
Well, it's great to know this one, because at the end I could separate, let's say, one, as you mentioned, right? One from all ETP, so to run queries, inserts. Another one is to, for example, to use the system that we have with Power BI, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And you will be, let's say, if you have like heavy workload on the primary replica, you will be getting like more benefit from it, because you will be able to let your queries that are updating or deleting the data on the database to have more compute to process these queries.
Okay, I like this idea because I'm going to pay for one server, but I'm going to have two. Okay.
Exactly. Okay. Moving, I would like to mention to you that you need to take a few consideration while using this feature. If you would like to monitor this replica that is dedicated for your read queries, you need to be aware that some tools such as the query store, the extended events, the SQL profiler, as well as the audits are not supported on the read replica. But you can use DMVs currently, such as the examples that you can see on the screen, to monitor the CPU, for example, the I/O, and how is the replica is performing. Also, there is one of the great scripts we have in GitHub that is available that you can use it as well to monitor the performance. Okay, moving on to the second option that you have. As I mentioned, that we have a scalability option available in Azure SQL, and you can easily move between service tier, or you can easily increase your vCores or minimize it at any time in Azure. For example, let us assume that we have two databases, let's say, for example, basic and one that is general purpose. At any time, you can scale it, for example, to P15 or business critical, and it will be an easy process. Regarding this process, it will be quick because the scaling process will include two steps. Once you initiate a scale operation, it will request for you a new resources with the let's say the destination, or let's say the required compute size that you would like to move to, and it will be easily switching the connections coming from to the old one to the new one. And for this one, I would recommend you to implement retry logic in order to avoid the few seconds that will be including the switch process. Moving back to the scalar process, also it's not only moving between service tier or increasing the vCores, also you can change at any time the hardware generation. We have multiple hardware generations that are provided by Azure, such as the generation 5, or let's say the M series, or let's say the DC series, and you can move them between them at any time and change it. Also, let's say within the scope of the scale, you have the scale out, which will be also covered later on in more details. But the scale out sharding, it means basically that you are dividing your big database into multiple database, which we call in Azure scale out. Regarding the scale operation, I would like to mention one important point, that regarding the hyperscale service tier, once you move to hyperscale service tier, you will not be able to move the service tier back to one of the other service tier that is provided for you for Azure SQL Database. But you can move between the vCores. But for this scenario, you can use other alternative if you would like to move out from the hyperscale service tier, such as restoring the database. Also, under this scope, we have two compute tiers that is supported by Azure, which are the provisions and serverless as well. And you can easily move between them at any time.
And Sabine, I have a question for you. What does mean when we scale up, scale down? That's mean that it's dynamically, that there is not any issue in my database, or do I need to do any actions, or what is the impact when I scale up, scale down?
Okay, let us have, for example, for this scenario, let us have an example that you, for example, have a basic database and you would like to move to premium database. Let us assume that you have made a request to move from basic to premium. Once you initiate that, the new compute size for the premium with the number of vCores that is requested will be initiated for you. And once it's ready, you will have a switch process on the back end that will switch your connections from the basic compute storage tier to the premium one. Now, for your application, we always recommend the customers to implement retry logic, because you will have the switch only will be for a few seconds. So if you have the retry logic, it will be once, let's say, that you connect to the database and the connection failing, it will be automatically retrying to connect to the other one, and it will be working for you without any, let's say, human interaction required.
So I need to modify, these are requirements when I'm using SQL Azure, right? To have this implemented in my code, the retry logic, right?
Yes, now this is as a recommendation, because it's even like in Azure in general, if you have any, let's say, connectivity issues, we always recommend to make sure that you have a retry logic implemented on your application.
Okay. Okay.
As I mentioned, I would like to show you also this graph that illustrates the hardware generation that is available for your Azure SQL database. And you can see the compute details for every generation that we have, and you can easily move and scale the database between them. Moving on to the third option, which is a very great option if you would like to reduce the cost of your database, and basically which is the serverless option. By using the serverless option, we have two main configurations for it, which is the minimum and maximum vCores, as well as the auto pause delay. Let us assume that you have one database that is not frequently used, and for example, like a reporting database where it's only collecting data for a specific time, but the other times the database is idle. You can set for this database, you can move it to serverless service tier. And while, let's say, if you configure the auto pause delay as 1 hour, what will happen to your database? That if the database for 1 hour is without any CPU usage or without any logins, it will be pausing. And during that time, you will be only charged for the storage, and you will not be charged for the compute. Also, one of the setup that you have for the serverless, that you will be configuring the maximum and the minimum vCores. For this screenshot, let us assume that we have configured the maximum as 4 and the minimum as 1. As you can see here, during this time of period, if your usage is within the minimum and the maximum, you will be charged for the time for the vCores that you are using within the minimum and maximum. But in case you are using below the minimum, you will be charged for the minimum vCores. And this will be saving you for the cost. I will show you later in the demo how the relationship will be between the maximum and the minimum, and how we can set up as well the auto delay pause. Now, in order to, let's say, make a good decision regarding whether to use the serverless or the provisioned compute tier, I would like to share with you this graph, or let's say this comparison, in order to make the decision based on it. As you can see, you have multiple aspects that you can take this decision upon. So for example, the usage patterns, the performance, let's say the response time, and depending on your business needs, you can go with the best option for you.
So, and the end, if I understood correctly, serverless, I'm going to just only pay at the moment that I'm using the database. So if after, as you mentioned, sometimes that you are going to deliver, that you're going to show in the demo, so my database will be in pause, right?
Yes, and you will be only charged for that time for you, only for the storage, not for the compute.
Okay. Okay, but what happened? What happened when my database was paused for I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, and I would like to connect again? What happened? So I'm going to receive an immediate response, or do I need to do something, or to run some option in the portal?
Let us assume that your database was paused and you have attempted the first login to the database. Now, it is expected for the first login to fail for the database, because it will be initiating the request to resume your database. But here also you can implement the retry logic to make sure that you will be retrying the connection, and it will be the second time it will be connecting successfully once the database is resumed.
Okay.
I would
Okay.
like to show you more regarding this further, let's say in Azure Portal. So let me start by showing you the first option that I have shared with you, which is the read scale out replica. And I will be going to my premium database since it is one of the supported service tier. So here I have one of my premium databases. And if you go to the compute and storage plate on Azure Portal, you will notice that you have an option for the read scale out, and by default for this service tier, it is enabled. And if you would like to connect to it, I would like to show you an example how you can connect to it. And here I have SSMS, and I will attempt a connection to my SQL server. But in order to connect to the read scale out, I will pass the option under the additional connection as application intent read only. And let me connect to see what we will get as a result. So here I'm connecting. Let me create a new query. And I will use the same query that I have shared with you regarding how to know which replica you are connecting to. And please be sure that you are connecting to the database directly. And you can see that the value has been returned at read only. So this means that this connection will be going to the read scale out replica. Okay, now for the second option regarding the scalability, as you can see from the same plate that you have on Azure Portal, you can easily at any time move between the service tier And as I mentioned, just take into consideration the hyperscale service tier. Also, you can change the DTU numbers if you are in one of the DTU modules, or you can change the vCore numbers if you are using one of the vCore modules. And it's an easy process. You will be doing it from here. Also, you can do it using PowerShell. You can use it over CLI, TSQL, depending. And also, one thing that I would like to share with you, you can also automate this process at any time. So for example, let us assume that you have more workload during the working hours, but at night shift, there is not much usage for your database. You can automate the process to have more vCores at the morning, but at the evening to lower it down in order to also to lower the cost for your database. Let me go back to show you one of the serverless databases. Currently available for the general purpose. And if I go again to the compute and storage plate, you can see here that we have two different compute tiers, which are the provisioned and the serverless. And let me share with you that if we are using the provisioned, you will be having the vCore numbers. But if I switch to the serverless, it will be changing from maximum to minimum. And there is like a corresponding relationship between them that if I increase, if you look at this number, if I increase the maximum number of vCores, it will be corresponding also changing the minimum vCores. But you can also change it upon your needs at any time. And we have here the second important configuration for the serverless, which is the auto place delay, which means that if, for example, you set it for 1 hour, it means that it will wait for 1 hour. If there is no activities like CPU percentage is 0 and no logins for 1 hour, the database will be paused, and you can change it upon your business needs to any value you would like to.
So in the end, it's just only 1 hour, and the minimum time in this case.
Yes. Oh no, you can actually change it. It will be yes within 1 hour.
1 hour. Okay. Could you please give me some details what that mean max vCore and min vCores?
Yes. Now you have the max vCores as I mentioned in the graph. For example, let us specific the same values that we have for the graph that we had. That we have, for example, 4 vCores as a max and 1 vCore as a minimum. Now it will be controlling the cost, how you will be benefit from the costs for this module. Let us assume that your database is using the vCores during the business hours between the minimum and the maximum. For this time of period, if your query is, for example, your queries are using 3 vCores, you will be charged for the numbers of vCores and the memory that you are using. But if it's below the minimum, you will be only charged for the minimum value for the vCores and as well for the memory.
Okay. So at the end, they are going to change dynamically. So if I need more CPU, always I'm going to have always this number of vCores in my database for my database.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. 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 Thank you. So other question that we have, you know that right now we have around 15,000 customers in our database using the same database. And you know that we are paying a lot of money to Microsoft in order to maintain the backup. We need to increase database to business critical to 40 vCores because with this number of customers we cannot manage. We have a lot of rows in the database. And when we have some marketing campaigns, we need to do a lot of things because we have many data from other customers. Do you have any suggestion in order to use instead to use, let's say, one database or other things in order to reduce the cost that we have in order to run these marketing campaigns?
Of course, of course. Now, for this scenario, you can use the sharding, which is basically means that instead of using one large database, you will be dividing the number of databases for your customers. And by using the sharding, which we also have other names for it, as I mentioned before, you have also scale out, or which we call also the horizontal scale. And if you are using the sharding method for your databases, where you are dividing the databases, you will be using Shard Map Manager, which is basically a special database that will be maintaining the global mapping information about all the shards that you have, which are basically the databases that you have. And you will be having the metadata, which will be allowing you to connect to the correct database in order to get the correct information for the customer that you would like to see the information for. And all of this process, how it's being done from the back end, it will be getting the information and the correct information from you by using sharding keys. For the sharding, you can use multiple methods, such as if you want to, you can follow the single tenant, or you can follow the multiple tenants. In the single tenant, basically it's one single tenant per database, and usually this method is used for SaaS services. As for the multiple tenants, it means basically to assign several tenants to one individual database. As you can see here, you can either, for example, assign one database for each customer, or you can assign multiple customers for one database, but you will not be, for example, using all the one database for all customers. You will be dividing them depending on the workload, depending on the business needs, and so on. And let's say in future, if you have any additional customers, or if you would like to move, let's, for example, say that you would like to move client 1 to put it with client 2, you can always use the Elastic Database Split Merge tool, which will help you to manage it and move the databases or shards across. And I would recommend you to use this tool in order to maintain the data integrity that you have between the shards that is available on your Azure SQL databases. So, for example, in this scenario, we would like to move client number 21 to a new database, separated database, and you can easily do it using this tool. Moving on, we have here the client app, which is a built-in with client library. And what it will do for you, it will be managing the shard managers. And you can have multiple shard map managers under the same client app, as you can see here. And it will be managing the databases for you.
So if I understood well, Sabrin, so the idea is create one database per customer, right? And implement this framework in my code. So every time that I want to retrieve data from one customer, basically I need to use this framework to specify that I would like to connect to the customer, let's say number 1, let's say, and automatically everything will change to the connection or all the operations to this database, right?
Now, regarding how you will be implementing it, you can combine multiple customers in one database. As you can see here, for example, here you can see that in the second database, we have 2 customers, not only one. And regarding the process, how you will be connecting and getting the database information, it will be using the shard keys, using the shard manager as well, the map.
Okay. So in the end, we are going to reduce the cost, because if we have a customer, I remember that we have 2 or 3 customers that is creating a lot of problems to us. You know, our customer 1 and 2 and 3, that is creating a lot of operations that increasing the backups. But we have other customers that it's not working. Let's say it's not using too much, or are not using too much databases. So at the end, we are going to reduce, and also it's possible to reduce the database tiers of this database. For example, to use other lower service tiers. Okay. in order to, okay, so it's great.
And let me share with you regarding, as you mentioned, it will be depending on your business needs. And the first thing you have mentioned on your question when you have shared it with us, that the marketing people are complaining that whenever they want to retrieve data for one of the for specific customers, they will need to delete some data, or let's say some tables, in order to categorize the data that they want. So for example, you can combine these clients based on the complaints, or let's say based on the business needs for your teams as well.
Okay. Okay, it's a good idea to reduce the cost and also to reduce the database tiers that we have. Okay. Okay. Well, other question that I have for you, it's you know that in fact this database, it's for the number of customers that we have at data, is reaching the limit about 8 terabytes of data. And I was thinking to, let's say, you know that I have a lot of skill in SQL Server to compress the data, but I know that we are going to compromise the performance in terms of CPU. But I would like to know if you have any other suggestions without needing to compress the data.
Actually, Hussein, this is one of the common questions that we receive, because for big businesses, you can easily reach the 8 terabytes. And for such cases, we have the hyperscale service tier, which is basically a vCore service tier that can let's say, move your database up to 100 terabytes. And due to the hyperscale structure and how it's being built, you will be getting as well higher database performance. And this is due to the fact that with hyperscale, you will have higher transaction log throughput, as well as faster transaction commit time, regardless of the data volume that you have. And due to this, you will be also getting other features, such as you will have faster restore time. You will have as well rapid scale out or scale up for your databases. And let me show you the graph that we have for the distributed functions architecture for the hyperscale, and how it can shows you the different types of nodes that we have for the hyperscale. So basically, with the hyperscale, you can move up to 100 terabytes in order to have more storage for your database. Let me actually show you this in Azure Portal for my hyperscale database. So I have here one of the hyperscale databases. And I will go back to the compute and storage plate. And as you can see here, we have the hyperscale service tier. And as you can notice that we don't have a storage configuration for it. And if I go to the overview plate, you will see that the allocated space is currently 40 gigabytes. And what that does mean, that within hyperscale, it will be starting from the 40 gigabytes, and it can go up dynamically to 100 terabytes. And there is no need to do configuration from our side. From your side, it will be automatically increasing once you reach the limit.
So if I understood well, in order to reduce this 8 terabyte of data, I have to, let's say, two options or two techniques. One is to go vertical, let's say to use hyperscale, or use sharding, that is more horizontal, that creates some a few databases, or one database per customer, or one database per 3 or 4 customers using elastic pool, etc. Right? So this is the alternatives that I have, instead to have one single database with all the customers, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So we could reduce the cost. It's clear, because we are going to use these several service tiers, the backups. Okay, I like this idea, because most probably it's a good idea to reduce our cost. Yeah, and also to improve the performance.
Yes, and if you would like to also to move the hyperscale, you will be benefit more from the performance that is provided by the hyperscale service tier as well.
Okay. 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 No, I like these ideas because I'm thinking right now how to reduce the cost that we have and to obtain the same performance or better performance. But you know that I have some concerns about the hireability because yesterday I need to send a report to our managers, basically mention that the great things that we are doing thanks to me. Okay, but this report took a lot of time, and someone mentioned that there is not possible to connect to the database. So in this such a situation that we have an issue in the database and in terms of hireability, what is the option that we have to add, let's say, in SQL Azure? Do you have any other suggestions?
Sure. Now, if you are considering to enhance the high availability of your databases, you can consider one of the options that we have, such as the zone redundant, the active geo-replication, as well as the failover group. And let me walk you through these options a bit. So for the zone redundant, it's currently available for the premium and the business critical service tier. And what it basically means that for example, here in this graph, we can see that you will be using one of the you will be hosting your replicas in one of the availability zones. Now, this graph is one of the regions that we have. And as you can see here, we have multiple availability zones. Currently, for example, for this one, we have 3. And you can host your replicas on different availability zone within the same Azure region in order to enhance the availability of your database. Now, as I mentioned, this is currently available for the business and the business critical, and it is without any extra cost. For the general purpose, since it is currently in preview, you will have extra cost with it. But the good thing using this feature that there's no required changes on the application and how it's connecting to your database. And also you will get better latency because you will be working within the same region and all the availability zones are available in the same region. At any time, you can change the database to use the zone redundant, or if you want, you can disable it at any time. But I would like to mention to you that you need to take into consideration that this is not available on all Azure regions. And you can check our public documentations to check if your current regions that are being used by your databases are supporting this feature or not. Moving on to the next option, which is the active geo-replication. And this feature is actually available on all the service tiers and all the regions. And it will be creating a synchronic replication for your database where you can have up to 4 readable secondaries. And you can move it, you can configure it to the same region that you have, or you can configure it to a different region. And here we have some of the methods that are being used by our customers, which we call the chaining, and which is basically that you will be creating a secondary for your secondary in order to create more high availability for your database. And I will come back to this point in a few minutes. For the active geo-replication, you need to consider that if you would like to fail over to the read one, you will do a manual failover, and you can use one of these tools in order to perform the failover, which is the Portal, the PowerShell, and the REST API or the TSQL. Moving back to the chaining concept, let me show you this graph, which will explain it further. Here we have one of the primary databases, and we have created a geo secondary. By the way, the active geo replication have multiple terms that we use. So if you say geo secondaries, or if you say geo replica, it is the same term for the same feature. So here we have the primary, and we have created a secondary for it. At the same time, you can create another secondary for the same one, and it will act as a primary for the second one. And this is what we call as a chaining. And moving on to the third option that you can implement, which is the failover group. It's basically an abstraction of the active geo-replication, but you will be dealing with the databases you have as a group. So you can have one or more than one database within the same group, and you will be acting and dealing with these databases as a group. So for example, if you do a recovery, these will be recovered as a unit. Now, for the failover groups, you will have an extra feature, which is that you can have an automatic forced failover in case if there is any failure. And this will be based on two concepts that we have, which are the failover policy and the grace period. The failover policy is the policy that will be triggered to do a forced failover in case the grace period has been expired. And by grace period, we mean how long your system can wait before initiating a forced failover. So you can configure this in order to, if there is like, for example, your system can handle 5 minutes to be in a failure. And after 5 minutes, if the system is not back, you can do a failover in order to maintain a high availability. Now, also you need to consider while using failover groups that it needs to be to a different region, not the same region. But you can always combine failovers with geo-replication in order to also maintain more high availability. And for the failover, you will have only one secondary in a different region. Now, for the failovers and for the geo-replication, you can use as well the secondaries for your read queries, and this will also help you to offload the workload. And here for the failover, you can use the failover group name to connect to the read-write replica and do the normal work, as well as you can add the secondary with the failover group name in order to direct your read queries to offload the workload. Let me know what are your thoughts, or would you like us to move to the second one?
Well, I have a lot of questions because
yes, tell me.
So that means that if I create a business critical right now, I enable phone redundant. That means that, as far as I understood, I'm going to have 3 different phones. That I'm going to have my replicas, always on replicas, because at the end I understood that we are using SQL always on in different zones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I have a problem with a replica in one zone, I'm going automatically, the system will run the failover process to the next replica that is in another zone and so on, right?
Yes, if you are using the failover groups. If you are using the active geo-replication, you will do the failover manually.
Okay, so in case that I have a total disaster, it's not possible to get back to the database. So if I have implemented a failover group, this process after the grace period that I don't know is 1 hour if I remember correctly, and then I'm going to, or manually or automatically, I'm going to run the failover to another server, to another, let's say, replica that I have in another region, right?
For the failover, it will be automatically done for you. So once, let's say, the grace period that you have specified has been expired, it will be triggering the failover policy, and it will do a forced failover for your database to make sure that your business is up and continuous.
You know, it's very funny because even when I have the failover group, if I use application intent, so I will be able to connect to another replica. So at the end, I'm going to have, so if you go back, please, to the endpoints that we have primary and secondary, even if I change the connection string application intent, I could connect to the RAID replica in the primary. So I have a lot of servers. Other question that I have for you is, could it be possible to implement the failover group and also to have active geo replication at the same time?
Yes, and I would recommend you to consider this because with this, you will have more high availability. You can, for example, use the active geo-replication to make sure that you have replicas within the same region, and you can combine it with failovers as well, failover groups.
So I could have failover groups in North Europe, West Europe, and also I could run a geo replication in order to transmit the data or sync the data, for example, to in US or other countries, right? If I understand
Yes,
well.
exactly. Yes, especially if, for example, your customers are distributed as well. You can consider this option as well.
Okay, that's great. No, I like it this point because at the end I'm going to other question that I have because you know that my main interest is to reduce the cost that I'm paying for Microsoft. Um, it's possible to use, for example, suppose that my database is business, it's a vCore, business critical with 2 vCores. It's possible to create a geo-replica with 1 vCore.
Yes, you can do that. It's not. It's as I mentioned, the active geo-replication is available for all the service tier. So you
Okay,
can, at any service tier, you can use this feature.
okay, okay. No, it's a good idea because at the end I could split the data without modifying too many things.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Okay, it's great. So let me to ask another question that I have about the performance, because you know that right now we have some performance issues because we run around 10 million, sorry, 10 million of transactions per hour. I think that is not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I would like to know if we could improve the performance without asking my DBA, please check the database. Do we have any do we have any other option in order to improve the performance, let's say in automatic or manual way?
Of course, of course. And for this scenario, you can use automatic tuning, which is basically a built-in intelligence that continuously monitor the queries that are being executed against your database and can automatically as well improve the database performance for you. So it will be providing you with the extra point regarding making automatic performance improvement on your database. Now, the automatic tuning, let me move to the next slide. The automatic tuning, since I mentioned, it will be using machine learning and also it will be using AIs to learn from all the databases that we have on Azure. And it will have a very low impact on your workload. So if you have, even like if you turn it on during business hours, it will not be very high impacting your business and let's say your queries that are running on the database. It's very low impact. And with automatic tuning, you have multiple options. You can set it automatically, which means that if you have any recommendations that are being sent by the automatic tuning, it will be automatically applied on your database. Or you can set it manually. If, for example, your DBA team would like to review these recommendations before applying them on your Azure SQL database. Also, you can disable this feature at any time. This feature is currently available on the server level and the database level. And this can help you in these scenarios where, for example, let's assume that you have one server and under that server you have multiple databases for multiple customers. And let's say for one database you would like to make automatic changes and for the other one you can have manual changes. So you can, let's say, change the setup on the database upon your needs. And within the automatic tuning, we have multiple options. And as you can see here, you have the options create index, you have drop index and force last good plan. Regarding the create indexes, it will be learning what from the queries that are being executed on your Azure SQL database. And if there is any missing indexes, and it will be giving you the recommendation. If, for example, you are using the automatic, it will be applying it automatically on your database. For the drop indexes, it will be checking which indexes that are not being used by your database and it will be deleted. It will be automatically or manually, depending on your setup. Also, forcing last good plan, which is basically a plan correction. an automatic plan correction that can check what is the good plan that was the last time executed in order to make sure that the performance of your database is good. Actually, let me show you this further on our Azure portal. And let me, 1 second. Let me show you the option that you can see. Here in the performance recommendation, if you are activating the automatic tuning, you will be having the recommendations. And how you can activate it, you can simply go on from the right side. Now, currently I am on the database level, but you can do the same thing on the server level. If you go to the automatic tuning plate, you have the options here. And as I mentioned, you have the on, the off, the inherit. The on, it means that you are activating this option. The inherit, it means that it will be inheriting it from the server. For example, if you want to do the same configuration on all the databases that are hosted under the same server, you can use the inherit option, which is by default, it's the selected one. Let me show you a sample of the options that you can see. For example, here we have, this was, as I mentioned, this is under the recommendation plate. And here's one of the recommendations that has been suggested by the machine learning and the AI that has been monitoring your database, that you have to create index. You have to create index recommendations. You have, for example, 2 drop indexes, and also it can give you the impact based on the performance of your database, if it's highly impacting or if it's like a low or medium one. Now, if you set it as automatic, it will be automatically applying the changes for you, or you can go to this recommendation, review it, and you can take the decision to either implement it or discard it.
I saw several times this situation, but when SQL will apply this recommendation will be immediately, or I have to wait, or?
Now, since it's using machine learning and AI, and it needs to learn the patterns of your database, as it will be learning from the queries and the workload that is being executed against your database, it will take some time, maybe up to 24 hours or maybe more, depending on the workload. Because as you know, the machine learning will be checking your database, studying what is happening on your database, and based on that, it will give you the recommendations.
Okay. So if I decide I could cancel this operation, I could take the text and create by myself this. If I saw that this recommendation will improve a lot my server, right? My performance.
Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, regarding the apply process, you can apply it directly from the portal, but it will take some time to apply it because the process to apply it, it will be looking and when you're, let's say you have lower workload on your database to implement these changes. But anytime you can take this, implement it automatic, let's say manually by yourself.
No, I like this option because other things that I have, other question that I have is what happens if after I apply the recommendation is not working well. This recommendation will be maintained for long period, or SQL decides that it's not the best. For example, if the impact is not the expected impact, how is possible to revert back this operation?
You mean you are using the automatic or the manual option currently?
The automatically.
The automatic. Now you can revert it back at any time you would like to. It will be, because it is a continuous learning process, Jose. So even if, like, for example, during all the time, the automatic tuning will still be monitoring your database, and depending on that, it will be applying the changes as well.
Okay, great. Okay, other two questions that I have, because we have just only 5 minutes. The first question is, do you know that I would like to know what that mean private link? Because do you know that our customers are using public endpoint or public endpoint, and they are using private endpoint, but I don't know what is private link. Could you please explain a little bit about it, please?
Of course. Now, some of the customers might be concerned regarding open the ports, or let's say that their databases is open for the public access. And you can limit the public access by creating a private link, which is basically will allow you to connect to your database using a private endpoint. Let me show you this graph that let us assume that you have an application and you have the Azure SQL database and you have enabled the private link and you have closed the public access. This will provide you with a fixed IP address for the inbound connections. And the good thing with this feature that you will be able to use it across regions, subscription tenants. So for example, if your application is hosted on a region that is different than the region for the Azure SQL database, you can easily use this option to configure it and secure it as well.
I know that you are a support engineer. What is the main issue that we have in private link? Because I know that we have many problems in this case, Sabrin. What is the situation or the one thing that I need?
If you would like to use the private link, there is one important consideration that you need to take into consideration, that if you are using the private link, you are closing the public access. So if you try to attempt the login from one of the on-prem machines, it will not be able to resolve the name. So if you are using this option, you need to make sure that your DNS is resolving the FUDN name for the database to the private IP address. You can use it either by modifying the DNS server that you have on the local or on the Azure, depending on your environment. But we need to make sure that the DNS is updated to resolve the FUDN name to the private IP.
Okay. So this is the main difference. So all the machines needs to have updated the DNS in order to connect to the private IP, right? So
exactly,
okay,
yes. And it will be regarding the DNS configuration, it will depend more on your environment. If it's, for example, you are using the DNS on custom DNS on Azure, or if you are using the local one. So you just need to make sure that the name resolution is being correctly done.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that it's the right time, because I'm afraid that I need to fire you in the company, from the company, because I received an invoice that it seems that you have tested one option that is called something like managed instance. I would like to know why I received this invoice, because you test without any approval. So could you please explain why it's managed instance? Yeah.
Now, in the Azure for the SQL, you have multiple options, and let me walk you through them in the next graph. Now, you have multiple resources that you can use in Azure to host your SQL database and server. You have, for example, the SQL Server on Azure VM, you have the Azure SQL Managed Instance, and you have the Azure SQL Database. And your decision on which one to use, for this one, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. And I would like to share with you this graph that can help you a bit to take this decision on which resource to use. Now, it will all depend on your environment and your application needs, your business needs. Let us assume that you have one application that is require interaction with the OS level access. For this scenario, it will be requiring SQL Server on Azure VM. If, for example, you don't need any OS level access, or if you don't need any patching, for example, or if you are okay with the latest version of SQL Server, your application is supporting it, you can consider the managed instance. And you can, for example, check that with managed instance, you have the SQL agent, you have the transactional replication, you can do cross database transaction, for example. If none of these are required on your business or let's say your application needs, then you can consider the Azure SQL Database. As the Azure SQL Database is a PaaS service that you will be more dealing with the database scoped programming module, that you will be able to have the configurations on the database level. If you would like to have more let's say admins rights on the instance itself, or let's say if you need SQL agent for your jobs, or let's say to use more features, you will be considering Azure SQL Managed Instance in this scenario. And I would like to highlight that we have one public document available that have a full comparison between the Azure SQL Managed Instance and the Azure SQL Database. And you can check these to compare the features, and based what is needed for you, you can take the decision which one is good.
Okay, so I understood right now what is the reason that you're testing the option, because I know that we are using SQL database. I'm paying. I remember the invoice that I received from Roombook Automation, and you want to disable this option or remove this option and run all the jobs using the SQL agent, right? For the reason you are testing. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so let me to reconsider the option to fire you in this company.
I will
Okay,
save my job today.
Okay, Sabrin, thank you so much. Well, we run out of time. This is a typical conversation working. So we are super engineers in Microsoft, Sabrin and myself. This is the typical conversation that we have we hear from multiple customers, multiple conversation, multiple calls with the customer that they ask questions about this. So we try to summarize this type of conversation in this presentation. I hope that you really enjoy about it. You have the detail of contacts of Sabrina and myself. Thank you so much for your time to attending this session, and see you in the next event. Okay, Sabine, Mutra, you want to say something also?
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And I would recommend you to always also keep an eye on our blogs channel, as also you have updated information on how to also to achieve this goal that we have represented for you today.
Okay, thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.